Hello and welcome to the 6 books I will never unhaul. This is part of a new series that I'm starting, My Life with Books. This is obviously part 1 because it goes back 55 plus years. I know many of the books that I'm showing are going to be older than some of the viewers, which is, a little different, but that's okay. The first book is Mr. Pine's Purple House. I loved this story, read it over and over again, and 55 plus years later, I didn't need to read it to remember the story. It had a huge impact on me, not just in terms of my confidence with reading. There's rhyming words and repetition. It's a wonderful story, but it also taught me the importance of not being afraid to stand out. Mr. Pine lives on a street with 50 houses that all look the same. So the story is about him doing something different that makes his house look different from everybody else's. And he tries a few things. The neighbors all do exactly the same. So he finally comes up with painting his house purple. People start talking they're going to paint their house. And he's like, no, you're not painting it purple. And the neighbors had decided they all wanted different colors. So not only did Mr. Pine get his own way, the street looked different. They weren't all exactly the same duplicates. This book taught me that it's okay to not be like everybody else. And I really appreciated that, especially as a young reader. The next book that I, again, read over and over, no doubt, is Jack and Jill and Other Nursery Rhymes. It's a Rand McNally elf book. Oh, should have mentioned. Mr. Pine's Purple House is part of the Wonder Books Easy Readers. Story and pictures were by Leonard Kessler. The nursery rhymes I enjoyed. I love nursery rhymes, fairy tales. It surprised me when I worked in schools that there are some kids who don't get that pleasure or haven't heard some of the ones we're familiar with. Part of that is coming from other countries. Countries all have their own different versions, which I think is great. I loved the illustrations in here. To me, pictures, words, I really enjoyed them. Of course, there's cats in here as well. It was just a really fun read. And yeah, just looking through brings back, some great memories of sitting and flipping through and reading my book. Another book, and I've mentioned this recently in my music tag video, is The Kitten's Voyage. Again, these books are all over 50 plus years old. This is a tiny elf book, and it's written by Barbara Young, illustrated by Marjorie Cooper. This book is, I believe it's the 1960s. It doesn't actually, oh, wait. See, here's where no Roman numerals come in handy. 1968, I believe. And see, there are some people who wouldn't be able to do that because I don't think they actually teach Roman numerals anymore. And it's interesting how much the copyright comments have changed. This simply says all rights reserved. If you've looked at some of the newer books, it's a big honking chunk of this, that, and everything else. I very much enjoyed the story, the pictures, cats. Loved cats and growing up on a farm, and we had cats and dogs. It was a great story about a family that goes sailing. They meet a beautiful king and queen There's the one picture that always stood out for me was the queen with her beautiful pearls, and they have a great time and a visit, and then they go sailing home, which also tied in with my love of the night sky and astronomy. So there were just so many amazing things about that story. Another book that I've had since childhood is Aesop's Fables. This is illustrated by W. Kurtman Plummer. This is from Companion Library, and the copyright's 1963. It's a year older than I am. I enjoyed Aesop's Fables. I mean, and I also enjoy parables, not a surprise. Fables have animals that talk. They're relatively short stories, and they have a moral at the end, and I always enjoyed those. It's like the kid version of parables. Parables typically have humans, not animals, that talk, like in the fables, and there's lessons throughout a parable. There's lessons at the end of a fable. So, for example, the dog in the manger. In this book, they call it an application rather than a moral, but some begrudge others what they cannot enjoy themselves. I know I read this numerous times. Some of the fables most people are familiar with are the rabbit and the tortoise, the race, and the tortoise ending up winning because, of course, the rabbit just takes off, goes gung-ho, but then tires out before the end, whereas the tortoise is moving slow and steady. And I guess that kind of describes my YouTube channel as slow and steady and just taking my time getting there. I'm definitely not the rabbit who, in a couple of weeks suddenly went, woohoo, or like some I've seen hit 10,000 after a year. And I'm okay with that. And I've just seen an amazing bookmark. Yes, I do have bookmarks in this book as well. It's a tea room from a small town not far from here in Mount Bridges. That's cool. In the beginning of the book, we learn about Aesop, that he was originally a slave. That's where he began telling his stories with animals. He became a freed man and left his original island of Samos, traveled to Sardis and other towns as well. These are all in Greece. We also learn about Aesop's death and how his stories have managed to live on all these centuries later. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you know any of Aesop's fables? Have you read them? I've personally enjoyed them for a very long time. The other book, it's probably close to 50 some odd years, is my Grimm's Fairy Tales. These, of course, are by the brothers Grimm. Lovely cover with different versions of the stories there. Of course, Pinocchio, a famous one. I remember that. And this is the book I'll be reading from for my Fairy Tale Fridays. Some of the more familiar ones. Cinderella, of course. In this version, in my copy, we have Little Red Cap. Most people know that story as Little Red Riding Hood. Rumpelstiltskin, definitely not the version that James Finn Garner had. And so many old favorites. Another story in here is King Thrushbeard. Kat at Ginger Bibliophile just read that. Be sure to check her out. If you enjoy Grimm's Fairy Tales, she does her readings on Mondays And sometimes you get visits with the fur kids, especially Little Man. Hansel and Gretel, another story that James Finn Gardner put a different twist on. So yes, this is very much a special to me book, and I'm very glad that I've hung on to them. If you've seen my unhaul rebuy video, that was several weeks ago, and I've reacquired over 34, I think I'm up to 37 books now. That wasn't all one shop. That was over the last couple of years, traveling to my thrift store, thank goodness, and picking up some old favorites that I thought I was done with, but actually wanted to revisit. The last book, and this is, I might have been 10 or 11 when I read this, I can't remember, but it's Dracula by Bram Stoker. Vampire story, historical information. My family is originally from Hungary, so there's a lot to this book, not just the spooky, creepy vampire aspect, but the historical information and the location where all of this takes place as well. It was an enjoyable read. I've read Dracula numerous times. I enjoyed that Stoker actually took the time to delve into things. My father grew up in a very small village, dirt streets, outdoor plumbing. His idea of an amazing Christmas gift was an orange. It was in the 1920s. It was a very different world where you didn't take things for granted and appreciated whatever you got. He also used to share about back then, of course, when someone passed, you had them in your living room, mourners came to your home. He told me about one situation where they had thought someone was deceased, had them in the living room, and a while later this individual sat up, and of course everyone freaked out. But again, 1920s, different time, different information, small village, no phones, certainly no computers or anything like that. So it does make a bit of sense how some of these legends and versions of vampires began. That's why Dracula is so important to me. He wasn't just my first vampire. There's historical information about Hungary and Romania in here. There's, the mystery part of what is this creature. It was just an enjoyable read. Let me know in the comments down below. Do you still have some of your childhood books? Do you remember some of the books that really got you excited about reading and following that journey? For me, growing up on a farm, books were very important. They were my entertainment. Although, yes, we had television, and yes, I do remember when we got our first color TV. TV wasn't so much a big thing for me. Thankfully, we didn't have all this gaming stuff back then. I spent quite a bit of time outdoors. I loved being outside. I was definitely what back in my day would be known as a tomboy. So I was up in the trees, out in the dirt. Dresses and dolls weren't my dealio. Did like my pigtails though. But beyond that, I was books and outdoors. I'm very grateful to my father for encouraging my love of reading, for his support, and making sure that not only did I know my first language of Hungarian, but also my second language of English. By the time I started school, he made sure I knew my alphabet. I knew how to read. I knew my numbers. I truly found it mind-boggling that during my 23 years in education at elementary and secondary, there were actually parents sending their kids to school who didn't know the alphabet, didn't know their numbers, and certainly weren't being read to or encouraged to read. I found that just mind-boggling as someone who started school with English as my second language. So I do hope that more parents start focusing on the importance of reading, whether it's a book in hand or using some type of assistive technology or the websites. It really is a crucial skill that children need, both in terms of gaining independence and being able to research and check out information as they grow older. He continued to encourage my love of reading, which, if you've seen any of my BookCube organization videos or book hauls, you know reading is still a huge part of my life. If you're still here, let me know in the comments with a little thumbs up emoji or a heart. Nope, I can't do a heart. I can't do a heart. Okay, if you're still here, let me know in the comments down below, either with a little thumbs up emoji or a smiley face. And until next time, take good care.